Welcome to Shadow of Truth, and today is Monday, October the 10th, 2016, and your hosts are Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org and Dave Kranzler from investmentresearchdynamics.com, and this is our Monday market update. Thank you all for being here.
The real estate market is definitely going to crash, and I think it could happen quicker than people think. And same with the auto market, because I came across some interesting data when I was writing up my short sellers journal this weekend.
Well, I agree that it is going to crash, but are they going to allow it to, aren't they going to do everything within their power, which is substantial, to sustain it and to keep it propped up as long as possible?
When you say substantial, are you talking about the housing
endlessly?
Are you talking about the housing market or the auto market?
Both. I mean, they can prop that stuff up. I mean, they can jimmy these loans and this basket of loans and that bundle of loans, and all that stuff's been monetized. So all they have to do is just shuffle it around, and what was in account A is now in account B, and it was purchased by, some outside entity. We'll call it the Federal Reserve, and all of a sudden everything is all hunky-dunky.
Well, actually, they can't. I mean, they can monkey around to keep mortgage securities and auto loans from really crashing badly, but actually, I don't think they can. It'd be too tough. There's too many. There's a daisy chain of counterparties involved there, and part of the reason that the housing market the collapse in the housing market and the mortgage market wasn't even worse is when the Fed did their QE, they stuck $2.5 trillion of that cash on bank balance sheets, and it gave banks. So what happened was there was hundreds of thousands of homes that had mortgages on them, and the mortgages weren't being paid, and the banks had stopped foreclosing on them because the banks weren't able to resell those homes until the Fed got the housing market pumped up again. Banks are still sitting with mortgages on homes that haven't been paying for 3-4 years
or longer.
Right, and they don't have to foreclose on them, because the reason why if there's too many, they would have to start foreclosing and just dump them to generate the cash, because the banks are servicers on these pass-through structures, the residential mortgage-backed securities. And there's investors on the other end, and there's derivatives wrapped around those securities, and so they can't let those securities default. But ideally, the way they work is the banks get the mortgage payments in, and that's part of what they do when they're a servicer of the mortgages. They process the payments, then they pass them through to the trust, and they take a small skim, which is their fee. Well, when the mortgagees stop paying, or a certain percentage, all of a sudden the bank is short on cash to pass through. So the bank has to make up the difference, because the bank is ultimately on the hook for a certain percentage of the mortgages when they go bad, because that's part of their obligation when they get the servicing contract. So when their balance sheets were pumped full of liquidity from QE, then they had enough liquidity to sustain a certain decline in payments. And then they also don't want to foreclose on these homes, because then the banks are on the hook for maintenance and real estate taxes.
Right.
So the short story is, yeah, they can prop up the financial side by printing more money, but they're not going to be able to prop up the demand side. And what's going to happen is I'm already seeing it all around Denver now. Not just in central Denver, where there's been a lot of homes on the market now for a while, especially in the high-end areas, but I'm starting to see it all around in the suburbs now, where I drive by a lot of areas where homes were not for sale. And now all of a sudden, there's not only homes on the market, but there's price reduced signs popping up.
I wanted to kind of change gears because this is something that was brought to my attention the other day, and a gentleman named John sent me an email and wanted to ask. He was asking about the reverse repo, and I know that that's one of your areas of expertise there, Dave. And so I went out and looked at the chart over at the St. Louis Fed, and on October the 5th, the reverse repo had reached a level of 536,588. That is the highest level that it's reached since October the 7th of 2015. And there was a spike in December that you and I discussed back at the beginning of the year that happened in December. But this spike is higher than that by a significant amount, because in December it got up to 498, 519, and now it's reached 536, 588. And below this chart, which I've found to be interesting as well, and I'd like for you to speak to that in just a second, is they have another chart showing the U.S. Treasury securities held by the Federal Reserve, and it's all maturities. First of all, what do you think about this spike in the reverse repo?
It's interesting. Someone sent you an email about that because I was looking at the reverse repo graph last week, and I think it came up as a topic, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, because the reverse repo spiked, and it part of the reason it spiked is it was quarter end, and the banks do this balance sheet dressing up where they need to put interest paying security. They got to take their cash. They want to get rid of their cash and have like interest paying securities on there. And the least risky way to do that is to figure out how to get more treasuries. So what the Fed does is you'll see I'm looking at the chart right now, and I like to look at the 5-year chart, and you'll see there's a series of spikes
Yes.
starting in 2014. So what the banks do is they do reverse repos with the Fed, and the Fed, the banks send cash to the Fed. The Fed pays interest on that cash, and the banks get treasuries on their balance sheet. And I do think part of the reason for that is they need those treasuries. I don't think they can have. I think they try to minimize the number of treasury fails on their balance sheet also. And the reason why there's a high level of treasury fails, and I think Zero Hedge has been talking about it in the last several weeks, where the settlement failure rate of treasuries has spiked up, and that to me is what's indicative of derivative issues, where counterparties are asking for more collateral from banks, and the banks need to scramble because treasuries are used as collateral.
Right.
I don't know why cash isn't instead of treasuries, but treasuries or other AAA type securities, but most
Supposed
counterparties
AAA.
want treasuries.
Supposed
So
AAA.
yeah, exactly. So so I think part of the spike up has to do with banks wanting to show, minimize the amount of treasury failures on their balance sheet at the end of quarter for the regulators. And for investors, they want to show that, hey, we've got cash, because cash isn't earning anything, right? Quarter of a
Right.
percent at the Fed or whatever if they put in their excess reserve. So look, we got treasuries, we got a fortress balance sheet here. So I also think part of that spike up, because if you look at the graph, it's the reverse repurchase agreements held by the Federal Reserve, all maturities, and you can get it at the St. Louis Fed, and just look at the 5-year graph, because to me that's the interesting one, because you do have all of a sudden, starting in 2014, all of a sudden these spike ups are a lot more often than quarter end or month end. And they've also, in general, the spikes are enormous. I mean, there was a
Yes.
spike. Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. So I think a lot of that has to do with, I think that shows that there's liquidity squeezes going on at these banks.
Do you think that this is tied in with what's going on with Deutsche Bank at all? I
It
mean,
could
does
be,
that
yeah.
I mean,
See, the
because
other,
if you go back, and the reason that I ask is because Deutsche Bank has been in trouble for a long time. This is part of John's question as well, and this is what he was asking about, is the correlation between what's happening here and with Deutsche Bank. And if you go back, like I pointed out, on December, if you go all the way back to December of 2014, December the 31st to be exact, that was the first major spike. The problems that Deutsche Bank is suffering with right now, they didn't start yesterday. They didn't start a month ago. They started a long time ago. So I don't know if this would tie into it or not, but it seems like that the issues that you and I have been discussing, in particular with Deutsche Bank, and then my concerns with Hetta Bank in Austria, and looking at this spike back in December of 2014, there seems to be some correlation between those three events because the spikes have gotten huge. And since then, that was the first really, really big spike on the reverse repos or the repurchase agreements. And then and since then, this is now the third one since that date, since December of 2014.
yeah, no, I do think it's correlated with Deutsche Bank. A friend of mine sent me. There's actually a sub chart of this, and it's called reverse repurchase agreements with foreign institutions. And that's where the really big spike on a relative basis occurred back at the end of December 2014. There was a huge spike back then
Okay.
of reverse repos held by the Fed with foreign institutions. And I do think, and I wrote an article about that also. It's in the archives on my blog. And I wrote an article about that, and I think that definitely. And I can't remember because I don't have time to pull up the article right now, but I can't remember. I think I did correlate it and connect it to Deutsche Bank. I'm sure I did. So yeah, no, I think there's been an ongoing problem with Deutsche Bank, and because what's interesting about this graph, and that's why I like the 5 year because it really accentuates it,
It really
is that
does.
is that it's basically flatline for essentially it spikes up when the Fed started its QE back in late '08, and then from there, kind of, if you look at the 10-year time frame, it kind of flatlines, and then all of a sudden it starts spiking up at the end of December, and that's when. And then there's also an uptrend there, and I was actually going to write a blog post about it, and I just didn't get around to it. But I mean, the fact that there's been a change in that trend and it's an uptrend, that right there should set off alarm bells. But of course it doesn't because no one looks at the reverse repurchase agreement. It's kind of a arcane financial market tool used by the Fed, but it's a tool nonetheless. And when there's a change in the direction of that, or and this is a definitive 2 year trend line now.
Yes.
And again, it's impossible to know exactly what's going on, but something ain't right.
Yeah, something is very wrong because once again, if you go and look at the 10-year, you can see the two spikes, and one in late 2008 and then another one in 2000, late in 2011. It spikes up, but not that much in comparison to what's happening right now, and then it kind of flatlines on both of those up spikes. And now, beginning in 2014, like you said, Dave, there's a very defined uptrend, and the spikes are just in comparison from 2007 to 2014. The spikes are just unbelievable.
Massive. Yeah, they're
They're
massive.
massive.
And I do think it's connected to derivatives, and I think it has to be connected to what's going on with Deutsche Bank.
I mean, it's just incredible. And when I was looking at, what do you think about this, about the Treasury flatlining? Is there not? I mean, it's not that, because I'm looking at from 2003 through current, and from 2003 to 2008 there was a slight uptrend, and then it bottomed out, and then it came back, and then it flatlined for about a year from late 2009 through 2011. Then there's a huge spike up, and then it flatlined again from mid 2011 to early 2013, and then from 2013 to 2015, or late 2014, it was an uptrend, and now since September of 2014, it's just completely flat. I mean, there's a few points difference in those two, and from September of 2014 through today. I mean, how does that tie into it, or does it?
Well,
Or
here I'll save you your breath, because what that's tied to is QE. And when the Fed stopped QE, they were spreading their QE between treasuries and mortgages. And when they so they essentially, I think they announced the end of QE in October of 2014 or something. So they stopped buying treasuries. And
gotcha.
they're still buying mortgages, but what they're doing is they're taking the interest from that they're earning on the mortgages, and they're turning around and buying more mortgages with that interest. So in a sense, the QE technically never ended, but the amount of treasuries, what that tells you is that the Fed hasn't had to buy any treasuries to help the federal government raise money. But I think that's going to come to an end. So see, the federal government did all these maneuverings. Part of it was, and this is actually a backdoor QE, Treasury QE, because Fannie and Freddie, I think it was 90% of their profits had to be dividended to the Treasury, and the Treasury was in, and so we had about a 2-year or 18-month window there where Fannie and Freddie were recognizing all these profits. A lot of it were just book profits; they weren't real cash flow profits, but they were dividending cash up to the Treasury to help and that was helping the Treasury fund the government spending. But part of that cash was coming from the Fed itself. So I mean, it's just a giant Ponzi scheme, is what it is.
That's what I'm sitting here thinking while you were saying all this. It's like, well, Charles Ponzi would be very proud.
Right, exactly. So and the government had some other sources of cash as well, one-time sources of cash, or short-term sources of cash. Part of it was dividends from Freddie and Fannie. Part of it was a pop in tax revenue from capital gains taxes from the rising stock market, a brief pop in corporate profitability helped taxes, and a brief pop in overall middle class income, and that helped taxes. And they also they did subtle ways to raise the marginal rate on everyone. But if you, in a sense, even though the federal government said, well, last year our spending deficit was only $450 billion or whatever they said it was, well, that was all accounting schemes. I think there was also cash from some of the black ops operations going on connected to the military over in the Middle East, and
The theft, the ongoing industrial strength theft that's been happening over there.
Well, that plus the Near East, because I know all of a sudden when the U.S. went into Afghanistan, all of a sudden the heroin production spiked, and we know the CIA has always used drugs as a source of their funding. So,
well, there was two reasons for that. They threw the Taliban out, which the Taliban had actually started making inroads to eliminating the heroin or the poppy production, and the U.S. troops came back in and said, well, you guys got to go, and they threw the Taliban out. And then those lovely people over at Monsanto developed a super poppy that grows twice as fast and is disease resistant. So, and if you go back and look at the poppy production as accounted for by the United Nations, then you will see this massive spike in production when the troops showed back up and threw the Taliban out, and then the introduction of this new super poppy developed by Monsanto. I mean, it is unbelievable. And all of this
Right. And
coincides with the United Nations um, Office of Drug Counterterrorism or something like that. And I've written several articles about it because they're this document that the United Nations produced in 2013 or 2014 reads like a corporate prospectus. Here's where our new production is. Here's where the new flow of customers is going to be. And here's how many people we anticipate dying. And here's how many people we anticipate being addicted to heroin, and gave all these timelines. And it's disgusting, is what it is.
I wonder if heroin addicts discriminate between non-GMO and GMO heroin. When I go to New York City at the end of December, I'll take a look at that. I'll go walk around the neighborhoods where I used to score dime bags after college. See if the the heroin guys are still there hawking heroin. I'll be like, is that GMO free? Is that non-GMO? Because I ain't using GMO heroin. You can tell Monsanto to go stick it. I ain't buying that stuff. Getting
Oh
mine
my goodness.
from Mexico.
Yeah, I'll get mine from Mexico, where it hadn't been bastardized yet.
So, well, what's interesting is, now that you do bring up the flatlining in the treasuries, the treasury itself is going to start having problems selling its paper because we know that foreigners have been, in general, selling down their treasury holdings,
Yes.
primarily China and even Japan, but China, Russia, etc. And the spending deficit is starting to balloon again. And we know that I think for the fiscal year 2015, I think that the amount of treasuries outstanding increased by a little over $1 trillion. So regardless of what they come out and say the spending deficit was, it's nonsense because the real spending deficit is represented by the increase in treasuries that occurs. So I've been thinking, and one of the reasons, and I've been saying that the Fed's going to start up QE again before it ever raises interest rates or gets a chance to raise interest rates because the federal government's going to need help placing treasuries if you've got traditional large foreign buyers who aren't buying anymore.
Okay.
So that's going to be interesting to watch.
Now, I wanted to ask you, Dave, and then I probably need to wrap up because we're getting a little long here. As you know, I've got an interview scheduled with Dr. Warren Coates tomorrow, and he was the chief over the special drawing rights, the SDR, starting in 1983, and then
Well, that should be interesting.
Yeah, it should be. And what I wanted to ask is there anything within what this discussion that would be relevant to Dr. Coates and the special drawing rights? I mean, because I just feel like the only thing I could think when I saw this flat line in this chart was these guys have been getting ready. But do you see any of this tying into the SDR at all?
No, not really.
Okay.
Because the Treasury flatlining was just a function of how the QE program was structured.
Okay, yeah.
What I think the interesting question would be is just ask him flat out: is the SDR going to become the new reserve currency?
Yeah, now that is on the agenda. That is absolutely. I mean, we've discussed this over the weekend through email, and you proposed that question, and I'm absolutely going to ask it.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I want to. I'd love to actually be in the same room with him to see if he's squirming, to read his body language when you ask that question.
yeah, it's going to be good. I mean, it's a fine line that I've got to walk with this guy. I really want to ask him some very, very tough questions, but I don't think that I don't think I'll be able to have that opportunity, simply because of the position that he has been in and the position that he's currently in. I mean, this is one of the architects of the monetary system, global monetary system that we're currently dealing with, and that you and I report on all the time. Every single day of our life, we report on his actions, and it's incredible. I'm very grateful to be able to speak with him. I'll say that. Very grateful.
I think the kicker question that you need to ask: does he think Hillary Clinton should be in jail?
Well, that's a no-brainer. And if Donald Trump, according to what he said last night, when he's elected, or I'm sorry, if he's allowed to occupy the White House, that he's going to instruct his attorney general to have her investigated and prosecuted. It was awesome. It was awesome entertainment last night.
Well, the best part about it that I thought was that the college students in the arena at Wash U all cheered.
Yes, they did.
That kind of tells you where the millennials' mindset is with regard to Clinton.
Well, they cheered her a couple of times also. I mean, I
haven't watched the whole debate yet. I'll do that tonight.
No, I watched it. I mean, it was it's very very high entertainment. I'm not even joking, because he told her right to her face that you should be in jail.
I saw that part because I had heard about that. Yeah,
it was freaking awesome. I mean, oh. Well, Dave, let's. I guess I'll let you get on with your morning, and we'll pick it up on Thursday.
Sounds good to me.
All right, buddy. Have a good one.
You too.